Your father left an inheritance of $300 million. The sentence fell across the room like a bolt of lightning. The three brothers looked at each other in shock. Melissa widened her eyes, trying to hold back tears. Daniel laughed nervously, as if it were a prank. Lucas leaned forward, silent, trying to understand what he was hearing. 300 million? From their father? From Richard Harper, who complained about every penny? The same one who used the same worn coat for 10 years? Who glued his own shoes with superglue? And who said phrases like, "I don't spend on nonsense. Money doesn't grow on trees." He refused gifts, cut his own hair, ate rice and eggs every day, and once cried over having to pay $50 to repair the washing machine. He was the kind of man who used dim light bulbs to save energy, and who would say to his children, "I have nothing. The little I have is barely enough for me." And now, a lawyer is saying he died, leaving $300 million? Throughout his children's childhood and youth, Richard Harper was a constant but distant presence. He was there, but never completely. Always serious, always controlled, always with that look in his eyes that seemed to weigh the value of words before speaking them. Lucas, the oldest, used to say his father was like a safe, locked, heavy, and impossible to open without the right code. Daniel said he was just an old man tired of life. Melissa, the youngest and most sensitive, believed there was something behind his behavior, something he was hiding, but no one could imagine what. What everyone knew and talked about was that Richard was extremely tight-fisted. He saved on absolutely everything. When his refrigerator broke, he spent weeks using a styrofoam cooler filled with ice because he considered it absurd to pay for a technician's visit. When he got a new sweater for Christmas, he insisted on exchanging it for cash. He paid bills on the last day, skipped buying medicine if he thought it was too expensive, and wrote down every expense in a worn-out notebook as if he were keeping track of the pennies of a bankrupt empire. "Money disappears when we get distracted," he said. The house where he lived was simple, with old furniture and almost no decorations. There were no paintings, plants, or objects of emotional value, only the essentials. The curtains were faded with age, the walls were peeling, and yet, when his children offered help, the response was always the same. "I can manage. I don't need alms." Melissa cried a few times at this response. Lucas became irritated. Daniel gave up trying. After all, it wasn't easy dealing with a man who lived as if he were on the verge of bankruptcy, even though he received a reasonable pension and had no major expenses. The truth? Richard always lived like a poor man, even though they could clearly live better. But never, at any point, did anyone suspect what would come next. His death was simple, a silent cardiac arrest. He slept and didn't wake up. There was no agony, no hospital, no goodbye. Melissa was the one who found him, lying on the couch, remote in hand and the TV off, as if he had simply grown tired of living. The funeral took place in the same cemetery where Richard's wife, who had died 12 years earlier, was buried. Few people showed up, a few neighbors, one or two longtime friends. The children were there, of course, but there was no denying the strange feeling of emptiness, not just because of the loss, but because of everything Richard had done, never shared with them. On the third day after the burial, while the children were still taking turns organizing the few belongings he left behind, Melissa received a call. There was a man called Jonathan Blackwell, attorney. "Miss Harper, I'm your father's lawyer. He left me clear instructions to contact the family after his passing. We need to talk in person." She was confused. Did Richard have a lawyer? He'd never mentioned it. When he told his brothers, their reaction was mixed. Daniel thought it was a scam. Lucas decided to go along, suspicious. But there was something in the lawyer's tone that indicated seriousness. They arranged to meet the next day in a discreet office downtown, a quiet room decorated with subtle elegance. Jonathan welcomed them cordially, offered them water, asked them to sit down, and then, picking up a leather briefcase, said, "Your father left you an inheritance of $300 million. Silence. Melissa froze. Daniel chuckled, expecting someone to say, "I'm joking," but Lucas just frowned and asked, "Is this serious?" Jonathan nodded, opening the folder and revealing documents, statements, signatures, company documents, real estate, stocks, funds, international accounts. It was all real. Unbelievable, but real. "What?" Melissa asked, her voice cracking. "He always said he had no money, that he could barely live." Jonathan smiled, without irony, but with a certain weight in his eyes. He knew what this meant to them. He knew the depth of their shock. Richard Harper was an extremely intelligent man, and extremely private. He built this wealth over nearly 40 years and chose to live as if none of it existed. The lawyer then pulled out a letter, a beige, handwritten envelope. He handed it to Melissa, who read her father's name in her usual firm, hard handwriting. Upon opening it, she found a short note. "If you're reading this, it's because my truth has come out. I was never the man you thought I was, and you may never know the whole story. But everything I did had a reason. Now, you'll have to choose what to do with it." Richard didn't explain. He didn't justify himself. He just left the revelation. Like a stone thrown into a pond, the impact came, and the ripples would spread for a long time. Lucas was the first to stand up. He needed air. Daniel was white. Melissa was in shock. "This changes everything," she whispered. But they didn't know yet. This was just the beginning. The fortune existed, yes, but Richard wouldn't let it go so easily. The next revelation would come soon, and it would bring an unexpected challenge capable of placing the three brothers on opposite sides. Jonathan Blackwell, the lawyer, opened a locked drawer and took out 3 black envelopes. Each one bore the name of one of the brothers. He placed them carefully on the table. "Your father left a condition for access to the inheritance," he said, with the same calm tone. "Each of you must read the contents of your envelope alone. Then we will make a joint decision." The brothers looked at each other, intrigued. Lucas opened his first one. Inside was a note with just one sentence. "You always thought you were the strongest, but is that enough now?" Daniel opened his, frowning. "Not everything is what it seems, and sometimes the most skeptical are the ones who need to believe the most." Melissa read silently, and her eyes began to water. "You were the most sensitive. Now you need to be the bravest." Before they could comment, Jonathan continued. "Your father created a game, a choice. A single box contains access to the entire inheritance. Another contains a fixed sum of $100,000. The third is completely empty. Each of you must choose a box, but only one can keep the one that contains everything." Daniel stood up, nervous. "Is this a joke? He died and left us a reality show game?" Jonathan stared at him. "He left a test. Perhaps cruel, yes, but perfectly legal." Melissa was breathing heavily. Lucas closed his eyes, processing. It was typical of his father. Even after he died, he made them think, feel, and distrust. It was all part of something bigger. "What if we all choose the same box?" Melissa asked. "Then you'll have to decide between yourselves, or give up. In that case, the proceeds will be transferred in full to charities chosen by your father." Silence fell again. That night, The three brothers returned to their father's house together. The atmosphere was strange. None of them could sleep. They talked late into the night. They tried to recall clues, old conversations, anything that would help them understand what their father wanted. Lucas thought it was a lesson in unity. Melissa saw a final gesture of love behind the coldness. Daniel just wanted to leave with something. He felt wronged. He thought his father despised him. The next day they returned to the office. The three boxes were on the desk, simple, black, with a gold lock. Jonathan said, "Choose, in silence, point." They obeyed. Melissa chose the one on the right, Lucas the one in the middle, Daniel the one on the left. Very well. Send lot. Only one of them will be opened. The three looked at each other. "Who's going to open it?" asked Lucas. Melissa hesitated. Daniel was shaking. Lucas took a deep breath, stood up, and opened the middle box. It was empty. A deathly silence fell over the room. Melissa covered her mouth with her hand. Daniel began to curse. Lucas didn't react. He stood there, staring at the empty interior of the box. Jonathan just said, "So, as planned, the inheritance will be donated in full." Melissa exploded. "This is sick. He wanted to see us fighting? Testing greed?" But Jonathan didn't answer. He just picked up the other two boxes, still closed, and left. That night, Melissa cried. Daniel disappeared. Lucas, alone in his room, felt a deep rage. But the next day, Melissa received a new letter, handwritten, with the same beige envelope. And there, the truth would begin to reveal itself. The letter arrived in the morning. Melissa found it carefully folded under her door, along with an envelope identical to the previous one, beige, thick, with her name handwritten on it. Her heart raced. Her hands trembled. She called her brothers. Lucas arrived within minutes. Daniel showed up later, still suspicious. They sat at the kitchen table where so many difficult conversations had taken place. Melissa opened the envelope. Inside, a lengthy letter, much longer than the previous one, in Richard's firm handwriting. The contents, surprising. Melissa, Lucas, Daniel, if you're reading this, it's because the first part of my test is over. Yes, I tested you, but not out of malice. Rather, I needed to know who you truly were when faced with doubt, disappointment, and emptiness. The box you opened was indeed empty, but it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Lucas frowned. Melissa continued reading. When I chose to hide my fortune, I didn't do it out of selfishness. I did it for security, for protection. You don't know half of what I've lived through, and maybe you don't even need to know everything. But part of my story, you deserve to know. In the letter, Richard revealed the first big secret. He had worked for more than 2 decades as a financial advisor to big businessmen and corrupt politicians. He was an expert in asset protection, the creation of offshore accounts, and discreet international transfers. He made a lot of money, but he did it in the shadows. I saw men with billions in their pockets and empty souls, people who bought islands and lost sleep. I realized that money only has value when we know what to do with it. And I saw that to stay sane, I needed to get away from all that. The letter stated that after a federal investigation that nearly implicated him, Richard withdrew from everything. He sold off holdings, dissolved companies, transferred funds to frozen accounts, and disappeared. He created a new, discreet identity, that of a simple, widowed father of 3, living modestly. Daniel interrupted. So he was a criminal? Lucas shook his head. Not exactly. He was like the brains behind it, the one who kept the others from getting caught. Melissa, moved,
continued reading. I knew that if I were to die one day and leave all of this to you without any filter, I would run the risk of corrupting everything good in you. That's why I created a second will, and you will only have access to this if you go through one final phase. The brothers looked at each other. At the end of the letter were directions to a location, an old family cottage in Vermont, closed for nearly 20 years. Richard wrote, "There you will find something I left behind, but only if you go together. Only if you go as brothers." 2 days later, the three of them set off together. The road was long, the atmosphere tense. The old house still stood, though overgrown with vines and dead leaves. The key was under the stone balcony, just as Richard had said in his letter. Inside, the smell of mildew, furniture covered in sheets, and ancient silence. In the basement, they found an old wooden chest. Inside was another letter, and a small golden key. If they've made it this far, it's because they still believe in each other. Now, the last choice. The key opens a safe. The safe is in the central bank of Zurich, and there lies the definitive truth about everything I've built. Lucas swallowed hard. Daniel was stunned. Melissa started to cry. Next to the key were the plane tickets. The flight was leaving in 48 hours. Richard had thought of everything. The journey to Switzerland was silent. Everyone was lost in their own thoughts. It was like entering a story that didn't seem real. At the bank, after much bureaucracy, they were taken to a secure room. An employee brought the designated safe. Melissa inserted the key. The lock clicked, and inside there was a final letter, a folder with documents, a flash drive, and an envelope with bank transfer instructions for over $300 million to a new joint account in the name of the three brothers. The letter said, "You've been through it, and I'm not talking about the game. You've been through the pain, the doubt, the fear, and you've stayed together. Now, this fortune is yours, not because of what you have, but because of who you are. I chose to live in scarcity to understand the true value of things. Now, it's up to you to choose how to live with abundance." They returned home changed. The money was there, real. But now there was more than just numbers. There was awareness. The return from Switzerland was not just a physical journey, but the beginning of a profound transformation for Melissa, Lucas, and Daniel. What had previously seemed like a cruel mystery, an impossible riddle to decipher, became a concrete truth, too heavy to bear alone. The $300 million fortune was before them, real, tangible, and with it an enormous responsibility they had yet to comprehend. As they returned to the old family home where they had spent their last night before their journey, the place felt different. Not only because their perception of life had changed, but because somehow the past seemed to finally be aligning with the future they needed to build. The air, the silence, even the light streaming through the windows seemed to invite them to a new beginning. Melissa, always the most emotional, was the first to break the tense silence that enveloped them. "We did it, didn't we? After all, we managed to get this far." Lucas, who used to be more reserved and controlled, simply nodded, his eyes fixed on the ground. Daniel, who had always been the more critical and resistant, finally seemed to accept reality. "It's not just the money," Daniel said, looking at his brothers. "It's everything our father wanted us to learn, what he wanted to see in us." At that moment, no one knew for sure what the future held, but one thing was clear. The inheritance that had seemed merely a matter of wealth had become a test of character, a life lesson.
The journey to understanding its true meaning had only just begun. With the money in their joint account and the documents in hand, the brothers began discussing what to do with it all. They didn't want to repeat past mistakes or waste the opportunity to transform their lives and the lives of those around them. They decided to create a foundation in their father's name with the goal of investing in education, mental health, support for abandoned elderly people, and other social causes that Richard Harper had always quietly valued. It was a way to honor his memory and channel their fortune towards something greater than themselves. Melissa, with her natural sensitivity, took on the coordination of social projects, visiting communities, talking to families, and ensuring that each resource was used optimally. Lucas, with his strategic and organized approach, was responsible for the foundation's financial management and the investments that would sustain its work in the long term. Daniel, who had previously been the most skeptical, found unexpected purpose in volunteer work and project management, discovering he could be much more than he thought. But the journey was neither easy nor free from tension. After years separated by emotional distance and long-held resentments, the brothers had to relearn how to coexist, negotiate, listen, and understand each other. "The foundation is our father's legacy," Melissa would say at meetings, often with tears in her voice. "We can't let it become a source of arguments and disputes. It's bigger than us." Lucas always tried to remain calm, to act as a mediator in moments of conflict, reminding them of the greater purpose. Daniel, although still reluctant to trust completely, gradually let go of the resentment he felt, surprising his brothers with his determination and dedication. As the foundation took shape, the brothers gained access to more documents and videos that Richard had left hidden, carefully guarded, so they would be found at the right time. In a video recorded a few months before his death, Richard spoke in a firm but emotionally charged voice. It was as if he could finally open up to them after so many years of silence. "I wanted to protect you, my children," he said. "Money in itself is a trap. It can corrupt the best in people. That's why I needed to know who you really were before entrusting such a huge responsibility into your hands." He confessed that the modest life he led was not by chance, but a difficult choice, a way of teaching them about the value of simple things, effort, honesty, and true love. "I didn't want you to get lost, like so many I've seen along the way. So I created this challenge, this journey to force you to grow together, even when greed tries to separate you." The words, the sincerity, and the weight of the message opened a new dimension in the brothers' understanding of their father. He was not just the serious, tight-fisted man they knew, but a complex being, full of doubts and hidden love. As the months passed, the Harper Foundation became a landmark in the city and began to attract national and even international attention. Its social projects transformed hundreds of lives. Schools were renovated and equipped. Mental health programs were implemented, and a support network for lonely and neglected seniors gained momentum. Money, which seemed like a curse, has become a powerful tool for good. But the biggest change happened between the brothers. Melissa, Lucas, and Daniel learned to respect their differences, to value each other's qualities, to build a true relationship, no longer marked by old hurts, but by respect and brotherly love. "The foundation is our father's legacy," Melissa would say at meetings, often with tears in her voice. "We can't let it become a source of arguments and disputes. It's bigger than us." Lucas always tried to remain calm, to act as a mediator in moments of conflict, reminding them of the greater purpose. Daniel, although still reluctant to trust completely, gradually let go of the resentment he felt, surprising his brothers with his determination and dedication. As the foundation took shape, the brothers gained access to more documents and videos that Richard had left hidden, carefully guarded, so they would be found at the right time. In a video recorded a few months before his death, Richard spoke in a firm but emotionally charged voice. It was as if he could finally open up to them after so many years of silence. "I wanted to protect you, my children," he said. "Money in itself is a trap.
it can corrupt the best in people. That's why I needed to know who you really were before entrusting such a huge responsibility into your hands. He confessed that the modest life he led was not by chance, but a difficult choice, a way of teaching them about the value of simple things, effort, honesty, and true love. I didn't want you to get lost, like so many I've seen along the way. So I created this challenge, this journey to force you to grow together, even when greed tries to separate you. The words, the sincerity, and the weight of the message opened a new dimension in the brothers' understanding of their father. He was not just the serious, tight-fisted man they knew, but a complex being, full of doubts and hidden love. Years later, the Harper Foundation is one of the most respected institutions in the country. Melissa, Lucas, and Daniel travel the world, bringing education, healthcare, and support to underserved communities. They found a purpose greater than money itself, to build a legacy of hope, courage, unity, and transformation. The man who seemed to have nothing left a treasure that cannot be measured in figures, because the true value was in the journey, in the redemption, and in the love between brothers, the most valuable legacy anyone can leave. If this story touched you, showing how true wealth goes far beyond money, leave a like and share it with anyone who needs to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos. Real, surprising, and moving stories that will make you look at life differently. Thanks for watching this far. See you in the next video.